Welcome to the Own Your Life podcast, where our goal is to help bring hope, healing, and peace by sharing our experiences and inspiring you to own your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own Your Life podcast. Today we have an exciting guest, Irvine Nugent. He's from Ireland. He's got an amazing background and a lot to share with us about emotional intelligence. Welcome to the Own Your Life podcast.
Thank you so much, Ashley and Matt. I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing. I know you have quite the story.
Yeah, so I was born in Northern Ireland in 1967. And in fact, my generation have a particular name for those of us born then. We're called Children of the Troubles because we were born in that stage of the history where people may remember there was a lot of violence and conflict. And so the backdrop to growing up for me was this society which really had broken down and had turned violent and maybe had turned tribal, one side against the other. My family were very much impacted with that. I grew up in a pub and we lived above the pub, and the pub was destroyed and our home in a terrorist bombing. Thankfully, none of our family was hurt at the age of 6. And really, kind of that story and just really growing up in a society divided really has impacted my life in many, many ways.
Wow. So how did your family even, move forward, after you guys pretty much lost everything?
I was 6, and the memory I have of that evening is that my father had returned from the city, and he was in the pub, and the 2 IRA gunmen had walked in. They got all the customers against the wall, held them at a gunpoint, and put a bomb on the counter and said 5 minutes to get out. And my dad ran upstairs. My mother and 4 sisters were in conversation. They cleared, and then he picked me from bed. I was in bed sleeping, and we ran down the stairs across the road. And as the bomb went off, I can remember looking at that, but I can remember my father's reaction. My father had this clenched fist, and the words I remember him saying were, "Watch me build again."
Wow.
And it was, so the memory is one of resilience. So it's funny, the memory is, yes, of the bombing, but the main memory is a week later, my dad had managed to get a tent, and he had got chairs and furniture, and he got some drinks in, and all the villagers came. And, 1 week later to the hour, here you had people dancing and singing. And then one side of the parking lot and the other was still like the burnt out ruins of the pub. And it was this ultimate response, and one side was this scene of evil, and this other was of human hope. And so, it instilled within us that we get to choose how to respond. And my father and my parents taught us that at their core, human beings are good, and life is what you make it, and to choose, to have hope. And that's the core memory of that whole period.
Wow. And being so young, sometimes you don't remember, much of your childhood. And I know you said you have siblings. So how did that affect you all differently, or did you all kind of bond together when that happened?
Yeah, so we did. So it's funny you say this. So one of my other memories apart from that was when I went back to school about 3 days later. This is a small little village. And what had happened was that we were on the BBC News. So this was pretty big. This village never got. So I was kind of the star going back to school. And so part of my memory was, hey, I'm famous, I'm on TV, which is kind of interesting, how do we survive? How do we become resilient? Automatically we're programmed to look on the good things. My sisters were older, and so they did. I remember in conversation with some of them, they really struggled. They were placed in all different homes for a week afterwards. And I know my mother my mother disappeared for a week afterwards. And what we didn't know at that stage, and what I learned later, was that she'd been pregnant. She had miscarried because of the trauma of the event. And so we all dealt with it very differently. But, soon afterwards, my dad bought this kind of mobile home, which we stayed in for a year and a half while we rebuilt the bar. And I have to say, that created within us bonds that exist today. We are an incredibly tight-knit family. And I think, that experience, that joint experience, and we're a family that really looks out for everyone. We're very protective of each other. And and I think that comes from that experience.
I mean, there's so much there. There's so much wisdom in that, but there's also so much encouragement that people can learn from that, especially with last year and everything that's happened. I mean, there's so many different things that, as people obviously were locked in their homes and everything like that, they could have went one way or the other, and I think a lot of people did, because I think some people can use tragedy and obviously never come out of it. They fall into a depression, tragedy, and you guys had a celebration, which is completely, amazing in itself. And I mean, from your point of view, obviously doing EQ and everything has happened. I mean, have you found that, tragedy is one way or the other, or is there any middle ground in it?
Yeah, depending on the tragedy or the trauma, it is interesting, because I think we deal with things very differently. There is a dark side to this, and the dark side, of course, is that we can almost too quickly rebound, and that we don't spend enough time grieving, because at the core of others, there's loss. We lost our home, we lost our life. In COVID, we lost a way of life as well. People lost their jobs. And so, at times, we are, as human beings, naturally resilient. And so we do bounce back, but we do need time to grieve the loss. We need time to really bring to the surface. And for some people, that happens right away, and it becomes overwhelming, and they get paralyzed. For others, they're able to process that in time. And then for others, it takes a long time. They've shoved it down, and then all of a sudden it comes up in a surprising ways years later. But in the midst of that's kind of the diversity of our human experience. But what's key is we have to deal with it. We have to be able to mourn what we've lost.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree, because I feel like things that have happened in my past, I've been a stuffer, to where I've just kind of pushed it under the rug, like, oh, that didn't happen, or it's not a big deal, or I'll think about it later. Later never comes, or it does in a bad way. And then there's an explosion. I don't understand, what the emotion's from. But I definitely, before, working on emotional intelligence and whatnot for myself, that I definitely experienced a lot of that, is just kind of trying to block out the memories I didn't want to remember. And that was actually very, very harmful.
It does, because at the end of the day, what happens, of course, that, and you alluded to there, Ashley, is that we find ourselves having these reactions which are totally out of place, and they don't match the what's happening in that situation, and they're exaggerating. We think, why is this? Why did I have such an exaggerated reaction, or why have I had such an intense emotion? And I always say, emotions are there to give us information. And emotions are not good or bad. They are just conveyors of information that is happening in this moment. And that can be an invitation to exploration, and to say, well, that's curious. I need it. Why did I have such an exaggerated reaction? I need to explore this a little bit more.
Yeah. I love that, because I had thought, in the past that, emotions, they were good and bad, and that it was, shame to feel a certain way, or maybe guilty or whatever. Why am I feeling this way? And that's another thing that we've learned, is that emotions are what they are. They're not good or bad. It's the emotion, and you need to deal with it. And it's telling you, what's wrong and what's going on with you.
Yeah. And that's so vital, because, like, take the emotion of anger. So often people grow up with a language around anger, and unfortunately anger is bad. And it's bad to feel anger. It's wrong to feel anger. And I always say, hey, most of the changes that we have seen in our world are because of a righteous anger, an anger against wrongdoing, or an anger against, so anger is forward movement. And very often, when you explore, say, an emotion like anger, I always say, look deeper and look deeper, because really what you're going to find is a value that's being violated. And because of that, then all of a sudden, that's where this is coming from. Wow. And so anger can be destructive. It can be constructive. And that's the way I like the language I use around emotions. Am I using this constructively or destructively? Because the emotion is what it is. I have a choice in how I use it.
And I love that you said the language around that, because I think that a lot of people can only name probably 5 to 7, maybe 10 emotions, but there's so many more that you can have, and they're not able to even name them or give them proper characters to even find out how they're feeling at that time.
Yeah, Matt, that's there in it. Like, you've just hit across a huge topic, which is, our emotional literacy. And what we know from research is that the better able we are to name the emotion we're in, and also the depth of that emotion, how strong it is, the better we are able to manage that. And there's some wonderful programming going on in our schools now, where children are being taught to kind of explore emotions, name emotions. And what we know is that those who are better able to do that have much better self-management skills. They're able to deal with some of the strong emotions in constructive ways. But yeah, I've run into people and you'll ask them, how you feel? I'm angry. Well, what does that mean? I'm angry. Well, can you tell me a little bit more about that? I don't know. I'm just angry. I said, well, is it a number 1 or is it a 10? Kind of where, and so even to get them to explore kind of the intensity of the emotion, et cetera. But yeah, and unfortunately, we're not taught to do that. We're expected to pick it up somehow during life, and that doesn't always happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love how it's really like a holistic approach, finding where's the root, what caused this. I like tracing back, like if I'm feeling a certain way, maybe it is angry, and then I boil it down and it ends up being frustrated, or I feel like I'm being ignored or something like that, that I can drill down more to what it is and what caused it and why. Like, did Matt say something to me? Did somebody else say something to me? Did I see something online that triggered something, and why? Why am I feeling that way? And I think the more that we're able to identify what it really is, and not just, oh, I'm happy, sad, angry, joyful, whatever, the main ones that most people go to, but being able to really drill it down and figure out where's that coming from. I feel like that helps a lot with dealing with our emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a mindset that was unspoken there that I always say is so important when it comes to our emotions, and that is the mindset of curiosity. Are we able to be curious about us, to ask more questions, to dig a little deeper, to spend some time just to notice and to stop? And very often when we're beginning our journey into better emotional intelligence, it's what we're doing is we're quarterbacking. We're taking an incident that's happened and we're thinking, wow, well, that was interesting. What happened there? And then kind of, as you say, kind of going back on that, because then the future promise, of course, is that once we become more skilled in identifying our triggers and identifying what emotionally gets us, then we can have greater choice in how we react and how we choose to react.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of processing here, and I'm thinking about just the grief topic. Do you think the reason why it's so difficult to deal with grief is because it's so difficult for us to label it? Because it's not just loss sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two things I would say here. I think yes, and then I would think the other thing is, as a society, we have terrible language around grief. We have terrible expectations of grief. We lose someone significant in our life, and you take 2 days bereavement leave, and people come back, and it's the topic that no one wants to talk about. And this expectation that all of a sudden you're okay, you can get on normally with life. And you know what? Some people can, but some people can't. And then the other thing is, I like to say, loss and grief comes to us like waves. Mm-hmm. And that, I remember when I lost my father, over 20 years ago. and he had a particular candy that he loved. It was an Irish candy he loved. And I will find myself, going into a store in Ireland, and I'll see that candy, and all of a sudden I'm starting to tear up. And it's this little wave of grief, and it's just that's the wonder of this emotion. And I think we have to accept it and be patient with ourselves and really be wondrous at how it works itself out.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about society. I've seen people grieving, or if I've been grieving, or Matt or whoever, that maybe if it's uncomfortable for other people, it's, oh, why aren't you over that by now? Oh, it's been 6 months or a year, or whatever. Like, why is that still bothering you? Like, it's a problem that we're still grieving.
Yeah. And we have this false narrative as well that we have to say the perfect thing. So the person comes there, the uncomfort, of course, is not just, it's we're uncomfortable sitting with someone because we feel we have to say some magic words that are appropriate. And so often the most powerful thing we can do is be present and say nothing. And just to know that by our presence, we're here and we're supporting you, we're praying for you, or whatever. But just that presence as well is important. And we have strange relationships with silence, and for some of us we can do it, and for a lot of us we just can't.
And this is going to be this is going to stray off the emotion stuff there. And I see that you have Inside Out characters in your background there. That movie is completely way more detail oriented about emotional stuff than anything out there. I think it almost labels emotions down to a T, and it's a kid's movie, but I don't even, a lot of people don't even understand what's going on there.
Oh, totally. And so what's interesting, there's two things about that movie. One is the scientific advisor was Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman, of course, is the psychologist really who is the grandfather of emotional research. So back in the 1960s, he was dedicating his life to the study of emotion when most scientists were laughing and saying, are you kidding me? Emotions? We don't study emotions. And then there's the second thing is absolutely that movie is a beautiful blueprint about how we deal with emotions. I coach leaders, and one of the things I always say to them is, I don't care how old you are, you're going to watch this movie. If you've got kids, you can bring them in and watch it with them, but it's mandatory watching. And it's really interesting because where that movie can take you and the exploration of those core emotions.
Yeah.
I know the first time Matt and I saw that, we were like, this is really deep. Like, this is extremely deep. This is not just some kids' entertainment. And we definitely dove deep into it. And I think it's funny because Matt was home yesterday, and we were actually watching Coco, which is another Pixar movie. And I cried at the end, which I find myself crying in all of these Pixar movies. It's really funny. But I feel like I'm empathetic, so I can feel like what they're feeling. And I know they're not even a real person, it's a character, but like I put myself in their shoes and like I feel it too, like I'm there, and then I start crying and feeling the emotion. But that's funny because we just did that yesterday.
Well, what's interesting as well I'll say one other thing about Inside Out. Actually, Paul Ekman developed a talking points for parents and children to talk about emotions. So if you just Google Paul Ekman talking points Inside Out, you'll find that document. It's a really beautiful document. Using the movie as an educational platform to talk about emotional life with children.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. I mean, that wasn't around when I grew up. So
no, likewise. It's stuff up our lip and get on with it,
Yeah.
So it was,
it was toughen up, buttercup, and move on.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
I know you coach a lot of leaders. You said that. So I know with a lot of stuff going on right now, have you found that more leaders are being challenged with, because you used to be able to, the old saying was, if somebody's breathing, they need encouragement. And now I feel like there's almost a balance of people want more empathy than encouragement now. And have you been able to coach leaders around that kind of diverse thing that's going on right now in the market?
Yeah, I mean, it's empathy is coming to the fore because I think there's a number of reasons of that. I think part of it is research, is that we're beginning to really understand the science behind connection and how powerful empathy is. I'm actually doing some very interesting work at the moment with a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist, and we're going into some police departments, law enforcement, and to talk about emotional intelligence and empathy training as well, and how this is the key to really making connections. So I think, I think people's experience of the pandemic has been very different. And woe to the leader that paints people with the same brush, because you can have two people in very similar housing experiences, and yet their reactions have been very different. And so part of what I've been working with leaders is not to make assumptions and to really to check in, where are people at with this? Because people are really reacting very differently, and their need for support difference too. So just to have the ability to be empathetic in that situation, and then to adjust perhaps the support, and to note the support that some people will need more than others. And then just the other thing, there's different waves in this pandemic. I know for me, I started out and I think, oh, this will be like 6 weeks or 6 months. And like as an entrepreneur, I kind of like, I'll just hang in there. And after 3 months, I said, oh, I'm going to have to make some adjustments. This is going to be longer. So, and then there was, kind of that. And I know I dipped down a little bit of depression for a month, like, oh my God. And so the ability, the leader's ability to really connect to that experience, to be able to read what people are going through, and to provide the support, I think is essential, and will continue to be essential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's also important because not everybody, most people are working virtually. So as we're in Florida and everything's open, and it's almost like COVID is totally gone down here, but that's not the case for somebody in California or New York. Yeah. And if you're a manager of people in all these different states, it's almost like you got to treat everybody a little like differently with what they're going through.
Yeah. And I've got some clients up in New York. So the enormity of, say, a young couple with kids trying to manage life in a 1,000-foot apartment, compared to someone in a single family home is totally different, and it's so, and it's one thing to have a few weeks of that, but to have like for a year, it's the stress, the strain is just being very different.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think for me too, I'm just thinking about all different types of leaders and how people address people. And obviously the leader's emotional quotient is going to be huge in this time. And I feel like sometimes we've given leaders some questions to ask somebody, and it's just a complete check the box. They don't even listen to the answer, and there's zero empathy behind it. And you can kind of see the person that they're talking to, like, just kind of melt into the chair, if you will. Like, they're just like, oh, you're not even listening to me. And both parties almost check out of the conversation, and you can watch it from afar.
Yeah. Yeah. The quality of our presence. And at the core, you mentioned it there, Matt, the core is listening. It is this ability to, and I find that a lot of leaders, they equate empathy. First of all, they equate empathy with a few things. They equate empathy with being soft. It's all very soft. And then the second thing is, it just takes too much time. I don't have time. I've got work to do. I don't have time to be empathetic, et cetera. And I always, I say to leaders, I said, you can have a 15-minute conversation where you're checking boxes, or you can have a 5-minute conversation where you are giving the person 100%. And that 5 minutes, it's almost, when we're fully present, I like to say it stretches time, and it feels different. Yeah. And employees have a different experience. And so ultimately, and that's what people are seeking. People are seeking understanding. They're seeking belonging, and if you want a productive person, then to the extent that they feel they've been listened to and are productive, it's, at the end of the day, it impacts the bottom line. There's nothing soft about this. This is really about the bottom line.
Yeah. And do you think that because of it, Zoom meetings have helped or hurt this?
Zoom is it's an interesting phenomenon. So I think I think we've become, it's interesting. What I found is in my experience is that people now are being loaded with incessant Zoom meetings. So people are going, because the technology makes it so easy, we go from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. Now you just think you were back at work. Even if you had back-to-back meetings, it was a break. You had conversation, you went there. And so I think we've heard about Zoom fatigue. I often wonder if it's touche fatigue rather than Zoom fatigue. We're so tired just sitting down, and I think what we need to do is we do need to bring breaks. We need to create kind of time for ourselves, and because just the mental fatigue. And then the second thing is, I think we also need to create opportunities to connect with other people. That's not just a formal meeting, because the problem now is everything just becomes a meeting, and then a meeting, we miss these casual conversations that were happening too. So I think Zoom has been a blessing and it's enabled that, but I think now we need to rethink how we're using Zoom, and certainly because I think we potentially could burn out people as well.
Yeah. Do you think that's also made people maybe socially awkward, or as we start getting back together and having more, in-person office time, do you think that's been impacted so much that now people are going to be more socially awkward because we've been covering our face and hiding that for so long that now it's obviously going to be different?
So I think at the beginning it is. I think I've been in a few gatherings now where, I'm just like, I'm an observer of a human person. And so it's kind of comical a little bit, people are kind of like, do I hug? Do I not hug? What do I do? And so it's kind of like they're negotiating, which is very interesting, kind of what do we do? Do we hug? So I think we are going to have to negotiate that. However, I do believe at our core as human beings, we are social beings. And I think when we get beyond the awkwardness, I think we will return quicker than we even thought into the forms of social connection that we've always done. But yeah, it is. And for those that find connection awkward, this part of this has been comforting, in the sense of, I'm able to kind of isolate myself. And do I really have to re-engage with the world again? And that's going to be an interesting issue for businesses, because some employees are just they won't want to come back to the office. So that's, yeah. I think we're in a transition period.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when, because I had a different position at the beginning of COVID and everything, where it was more in-person interactions. And I remember when I had to stop shaking people's hands, that was like devastating to me. Yeah. I did not like that. So I'm excited to get back to some sort of human contact.
Yeah, I'm a total extrovert. So amen to that. I am so ready to get out and be in close contact and conversation.
Yeah.
I guess from your standpoint too, just within all that, is that, have you seen that without physical touch, has that been emotionally damning to a lot of people in this society and to a lot of leaders as well, without being able to have any type of physical touch?
I mean, I do. I mean, I think, just from a neurochemical standpoint of view, when we touch another human being, there's oxytocin, which is a neurochemical, is released, which is the bonding chemical. So we are hardwired to have connection. We're hardwired to bond. And so when you take that away in isolation, it does impact. And I think, no matter, as wonderful as Zoom has been, and I think you can have very powerful meetings with Zoom, I think there's a balance as well. And I think we're reaching our limit now of not having that interpersonal contact with other people. It is a different experience than it is in the virtual experience. So yes, I do think I'm not sure how we might measure that now, but I think there's been an impact.
And I feel like there's a Zoom, like you just said, I feel like there's not an easy way to bond with somebody over Zoom like there is in person. Yeah. Because you can read the person's body language, you can kind of see how they're feeling about certain topics, and you're able to navigate that easier with Zoom. You sometimes you can only see somebody's eyes, you know what I mean? Like you can't really see much.
Yeah. You're
an expert in that field, I'm not. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm always kind of like, I always say to people, now sit back a little bit so I can see some of your hands, etc. The one trick I will tell you about Zoom, one of the things that mentally why Zoom is so exhausting is that we as human beings are not used to looking at ourselves speaking.
Mm.
And there is a feature in Zoom where you can turn that off. And I always recommend to everyone, turn it off. Once you're comfortable with yourself being on camera, turn that off, because you're going to be, it's not going to mentally exhaust you as much, and you're going to have much better conversations with people. But this incessant looking at ourselves speaking is distracting and tiring.
Wow.
I never even thought of that. It's like, I guess it's like sitting in front of a mirror,
Yes.
for hours on end. Yeah,
looking at yourself, and of course you can't help but look at yourself. So of course you're absolutely multitasking, because your eyes are constantly going back and forth with yourself on screen. And I think part of when people talk about Zoom fatigue, that's part of it. Part of it is that's not it's not natural for us to be able to see ourselves speaking.
Right. Wow. Yeah, I never even thought about that. But with all of that, you are a facial recognition expert. So how did that happen?
So I have been fascinated by the human person for many years. And when I was doing my doctoral research, I did it on leaders in the times of crisis. And one of the things that I was interviewing leaders, and issues then of accountability and credibility came up. And so I encountered, we just talked about Dr. Paul Ekman, who was Inside Out, the lead scientist there. And I began to look at his research. And of course, he is the person who uncovered the fact that there are universal emotions. And that those universal emotions as well can be read in people's faces. And even when people are trying to suppress those emotions, it is possible as well to read those emotions, what we call now micro expressions. And so he's the one that developed, no matter where you are in the world, no matter culture, sex, age, there are 7 universal emotions. They are happiness and sadness, they're disgust, contempt, fear, and surprise. And anger. And it's possible to be able to recognize those, and to recognize them even when they leak for half a second or less.
Wow. That's fascinating. So you got to be quick.
You got to be quick. But the great thing about it, so I'll teach classes in these, and people will come in, and we have a little pre-test, and people will score maybe 2, 3, 4 out of 14. And then within like a few hours of training, getting to recognizing this, that, and other, that can be increased substantially. So it is a skill that can be used, and it's a skill that can be trained. So yes, so even it is fast, but it is a skill certainly that people can attain. And it's like a muscle. Once you switch it on, you can't help but notice it in other people's faces.
Yeah. Is that something that you like to teach the leaders that you coach?
I do, because I think it's a critical skill. Really, leaders make decisions based on data, and so the more data they have, the better decisions they make. And so very often, what we don't include in data is people's emotions and how people are feeling. It gives them important stuff. So, like, just take for example, you're having a meeting, and you're talking about a due date for a project, and you move it up 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, you're able to see in someone's faces a flash of fear or even a flash of anger. That's incredible data. It's not that you're going to call the person out and says, "Oh, look, you're fearful or you're angry," but it's like, "Oh, let me pause here and ask a few more questions, because obviously this is having a reaction with people. Is it because people are fearful that they're not going to get the work done? Are they angry? What's this about?" So yes, it's another area of data for leaders, and once they're able to use that with effective questioning, it can be really impactful.
I think not enough leaders are really, just with a lot of stuff that I deal with all the time, I feel like not enough leaders are able to recognize that stuff quick enough. And they're kind of turning the ship as if it's the Titanic, and it's going to take them, 8 miles to turn, 2 degrees. Versus having a 90-degree turn like you're talking about there. I feel like that's the big difference with transitional leadership, as far as being able to transition quickly.
Yeah. And to know that as a leader, say, like with transition, with change, et cetera. So our natural disposition to change is not to like it. Most people don't like moving out of their comfort zone. And so therefore to be able to know that that's, the base for many people, and then to be able to, as you kind of set up kind of your methodology about how you're going about the change, et cetera, to be able to read people's faces, to be able to have real-time information on how emotionally they're feeling about things can be really helpful.
With all your facial recognition stuff that you do, what's kind of like what would be like the biggest tip for anybody that is looking for some telltale signs with facial recognition? What's like one of the biggest tips you can give them, or one of the biggest things that you can have them read or research or whatever that you have come across?
So, I mean, let's go back to, we talked a little bit about grieving and about sadness, and about, sadness has a very interesting telltale sign, and it's not really the lips, the pouting lips, the lips going down. It actually is in the eyebrows, and it's in the inner eyebrows. And so if you see that inner eyebrows are have moved upwards, that is a telltale sign that the person's experienced sadness. And it is a unique muscle. It is almost impossible to do spontaneously. So when we see the inner eyebrows moved up, and not the outer brows, just the inner eyebrows, it is a telltale sign that this person's in sadness. And very often we cover sadness up, and we've like a fake smile going on with the sadness. But I've often found, that sadness is one of the emotions in the workplace that we do not identify well. And we know from research that the level of loneliness in work, the level of disengagement at work, and this can be really impactful, I think, for leaders, because ultimately, if it's not addressed, what it leads to is turnover, and that's the most expensive cost in any business.
Yeah.
Wow.
I can totally see that. I think I've cried at every job I've ever had.
Yeah.
Or tried to suppress my feelings and not deal with them. So that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Man, there's a lot there that you just gave out there, because I feel like you're 100% correct that there's so many things that go unaddressed with grief and sadness and inside of a workplace. I mean, there's so much in that statement that is so true, and how much it affects your bottom line, and how much it affects the overall environment of the workplace, and how it's affecting each individual person that is involved in that.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
When you think about like the work experience, we go in often with hopes and dreams and expectations, and part of work life is that many times they're dashed, and many times and at the core of grief is loss. It's all about loss, and that's just an experience, and some people deal with it better than others, but in so many ways it's unaddressed. And to be able to read that, and to be able to have a presence that's able to bring some of that out, and then to reset, and maybe to go with new expectations, et cetera, can be, really powerful.
And I feel like sadness and even crying can be said as embarrassing. People saying, "Oh, it's embarrassing. Oh, don't look at me cry. Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying," because you can't really hide it. Once you cried, like, you can tell if somebody just cried. But you can't tell all the time if maybe they just yelled at somebody, or maybe they were super excited, that maybe that doesn't last as long. But I feel with sadness, it can almost be embarrassing. Or if you see someone crying, why do we always say, "Oh, what's wrong with them? What's their problem? I don't understand." It's usually a negative thing.
Yes, absolutely. And, it goes back to our emotions. Our emotions are there. They have helped us survive. They are part of the human experience, and they are amazing. And each one of them uniquely gives us information, data, and helps us survive. And the purpose of sadness is the cry for help. It's for help. It's in this moment, I need help, or I need to be left alone. Sometimes when people are sad, they need a little space. So it's almost like I need some space. Now sometimes people use that to push others away, but I think and therein lies the emotional intelligence as well of the person, to realize, what does this person need? Do they need some help, or do they just need some space? And to be able to kind of read and feel that out as well is important.
How long, I guess, from your expertise and you coaching leaders, how long does it take them? I know it's different for everybody, I guess, but in the same sense of how long does it take you to coach somebody to find out that balance of being able to address that and to leave that alone in those certain scenarios?
Yeah, that there, and it is such a unique. But I mean, I think part of that is. So I think first of all, it begins in our own self-awareness. So the leader's self-awareness. I find that the deeper the level of self-awareness in a leader, the better able they are not only to deal with their own emotions, but to read others as well. Mm-hmm. And I think very often we have a crisis in leadership of self-awareness, of leaders who have not, because there is no shortcut. There is no 999 plan that will give you this tomorrow. This is it takes work, and it takes the ability to spend some time to get to know yourself, to get to know how you respond to different emotions. And it takes a level of curiosity. And if a person is not curious in another person, emotional intelligence becomes a little more difficult because innately it takes that curiosity in another person and the willingness to spend some time just to notice and what you're seeing. And very often the training that I'm doing, we put a lot of focus on words. So when you think about, like, if you have an important conversation, what you do is you practice the words. What am I going to say? How am I going to start this conversation? What we don't put a lot of attention is what emotions might come up. And if this emotion comes up, how am I going to manage that? Or what might I see in the other person's face? What emotions? And if I see that, how might I deal with that? So there's this whole emotional layering as well, that's important as well, and to be able to prepare for.
Now, and I guess from your standpoint, I know from my standpoint of just dealing with leaders in certain areas, there's a transition happening in leadership right now where you're having the person that's in their maybe early 60s to early 70s that is transitioning out of leadership. That was the, it's work 24/7, no sleep till Brooklyn leadership. And then you have the leader below that isn't necessarily maybe as quality of a leader, but is more in tune with emotional quotient and is actually able to identify some of this. But there's a bridge that they need to cross as far as the leadership, because they don't have the ability to lead people as well as the other person, even though their leadership was from not a great place, but they're a better leader. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's this whole complexity now is kind of as we shift and generations shift and really, what we're looking for in a leader, it becomes very interesting, because I think a leader has to do two things. I think, when it comes certainly to emotions, first of all, a leader has to be able to connect, has to be able, and part of that is be able to show warmth, is be able to show, but this goes back to our basic needs as a human being. When I meet another person, I want to, are you my friend or are you my foe? So in other words, that we need to feel the connect. But then the other area of leadership is competence. Yeah. Is, do you have authority? Are you able to show us that you're able to get things done? And part of that is essential in leadership too. And that therein lies the balance. And I think we tend to veer towards one end. Naturally, it's our home base. And so the leaders you're describing tend to be more at home in the competence, that they exude power, influence. They've got that, and maybe their warmth side wasn't that good. And then the others are very good at the warmth and connection, but then it comes at times is the competence part isn't there, and I think therein as well. And so it's a shift, and it's a different learning then that's required.
Yeah, and I found that, like, in these certain balances, that almost the people that were underneath the person that was way more competent and confident and had more of the kind of intangible qualities of, they knew that they were going to show up. They were consistent no matter what. That regime of underneath that leadership almost has to leave for the other leader to even become somewhat successful and show the level of competence they have and have more people that just know them as the leader and never knew the other person, for them to actually end up being successful long term, because it's hard for them to turn over the old regime into actually following them.
Yeah, it takes time. Ooh, transitions are really tough. And I know I was CEO of 2 organizations, and I made, at my beginnings of life, I made rookie mistakes. And one of the rookie mistakes was that I created too much change too quick, because I was a very different type of leader than the person that came. And like you say, the structure supported them. And so I kind of rattled the structure up a little bit. And of course, therein lies a great learning lesson was, that may not be advisable too quick. You may have to kind of, negotiate a little bit more, and change takes time for some people. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of people don't want to give it the time that it deserves, especially with emotional intelligence. Like you had said, like, oh, I don't have time for that, I'm too busy, or, it's all warm and fuzzy and I don't want to be that way, or whatever. That I think we need to, realize and recognize that it is going to take time, but that's okay. And it's not an overnight fix. You're not just going to wake up tomorrow and be, the best ever at identifying your emotions. But it's being okay with giving it time.
Absolutely. And the great thing about emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, that there isn't a time when you cannot progress. So the great thing about it is, no matter where you're at in your life, there's an opportunity to grow and expand. And no matter what age you are, it's never too late to start. I always say, like the quality of our life so often depends on the quality of our relationships. And emotional intelligence at its core is about helping people thrive in relationships. And if we can do that, then the quality of our life, no matter what our circumstances, improves. So it's a goal, I think, that we all would want. And and then I think, I always say, I think the 2 things, the mindsets that you need to grow in emotional intelligence, one I mentioned before, which is curiosity. But then the second thing is humility. I think when it comes to our emotions, I'm the so-called expert in emotional intelligence. And I know tomorrow morning, if I wake up and I've had a bad night's sleep and then I'm hungry, that I can be as emotionally illiterate as any other person and show up as a bear. And I just learned humility in that, in the sense of, these emotions are so powerful that we, and the more self-aware I am that this is not going to be a good day and I'm not on my best self today. And so therefore I just have to be kind to myself and recognize that I might be triggered a little bit easier, and today's going to be a little tougher.
It all comes down to grace.
Absolutely. Amen to that.
I think anybody who's going to listen to this podcast, they need to really listen to this 3 times. You've given so much different levels of understanding of each individual thing that you've talked about. You could dissect this even 6 times and you're probably not going to get everything out of it that you need. Because you went so deep on so many different things that without any type of emotional intelligence, you're just going to not even connect to it. But if you do have some emotional intelligence, I have probably a grade of about a D compared to you. But there's so much more that you can learn from everything you've given out. Just between asking the questions, going through leadership stuff, learning about a transition. There's so much there that you've given, and I appreciate everything you've given, because I feel like it's all applicable to, coming out of COVID, how we dealt with it in the middle of it. Because I know that there's so much more that you can probably even offer, I guess. What advice are you giving to leaders coming out of COVID, and are you giving them a certain game plan, or is it just, what are you giving them to come out of COVID to make them the most successful in this time?
Well, I think, one of the things I'm in discussion, it's a really interesting discussion. One of the things I'm finding the more I talk with people is that COVID had a profound impact on everyone. And, I think when we got over the shock and the fear, there also, one question I always ask everyone, what was the blessing in the midst of all this? because there were blessings in this. And it's very interesting what people are saying. I was on a retreat a week ago with some young leaders, and talk about powerful answers. And one of the people come in, he said, I learned that being by myself would not destroy me.
Wow.
And I thought, whoa, what an answer.
Yeah.
That I learned to be alone. And I think from that, people then, as they transition back to work, they don't want to lose some of these things that happened. Like for many people, it was like, I learned that I could have like a tea parties with my kids in the morning. I learned that I could have time to speak to relatives. So I think leaders need to recognize that the people changed and they're experienced life in different ways, and they don't want to lose that. And there's a lot of fear around this. And I think to have this space and the time to talk things through, and that people don't want to think that they're just going to go back to things as normal and nothing changed. And I think even just recognizing that and acknowledging that as a leader is incredibly important. And then to kind of even explore, well, what does that look like in the workplace? And I think, these are conversations. Now, the reality is they may not be able to change a lot, but just to acknowledge that is so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. And I feel like there's going to be, after effects of this for the rest of our lives. Just seeing how people have grown and adapt and changed things for the better because of this. So just seeing, the positive aspects of it too.
And I mean, I think some of the negative impacts that has had on it too, even from that standpoint, is that being back at work can alleviate some of the negative things that happened. So it's kind of a catch-22 where some people are like, I miss this so much. I missed having coffee with you, or I missed having, breakfast with you or lunch with you or whatever the case may be. I missed it so much because, as an extrovert, it was it obviously impacted extroverts extremely differently than introverts.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there is this pent up, I know for me, I have this pent up desire to kind of like, mingle again and to meet people, et cetera. I have a pent up desire to travel. But I think in times, when that pent up level of energy dies down a little bit, I think we'll go into a more reflective phase and it'll be, what do we learn from this? Because I think there's important lessons about the nature of work, about meaning, about belonging. And I think it can lead to a really interesting conversation.
Yeah. I think that just saying the belonging, I mean, like, I'm sure that you probably teach a lot of your leaders about belonging cues as well. How are you teaching people about the belonging cues of being in your culture? And like, how are you teaching your leaders about the belonging cues? Obviously when people are re-entering this, because they have to redefine those belonging cues for them to be able to teach them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like the other thing that goes with belonging, I think even like one stage before then, it's very interesting to come around. So, one of the challenges of the pandemic is here you had a threat, a real threat to our lives. This was a pandemic that potentially, could have killed us. So in other words, we go into survival mode. Mm-hmm. And of course that creates kind of a whole different emotional setup. But I think, as you talk about belonging as well, hand in hand to that is safety. So how do we create cultures where people feel safe to express their needs which lead then to belonging? That this is a space that I can commit to. This is a place that I want to give buy-in to, and this is a space where I want to be for the longer term. And so all of that goes hand in hand. And I think, as we re-enter as well, safety becomes a physical thing, but now we're getting into the more psychological issues of safety as well.
Yeah. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of need for more, therapists and whatnot coming out of this, and a lot of good books that are going to be written just reflecting, on everybody's experience and how they dealt with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be, and I think one of the things I always say, is I used to work with homeless youth, and the organization I ran was with homeless, and youth from very desperate situations. And I remember, you can look at that in two ways. You can say, oh my God, how horrible some of these experiences have been, and they were horrible. But the other thing that you learn from this as well is how resilient the human person is, and it's extraordinary. And so I think, yes, this has been an incredibly tough year, but we are resilient by nature. And it is interesting, that we can bounce back, and it is possible to be resilient as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And your story's been amazing, and we really appreciate your time tonight. You've given us so many amazing nuggets to share with our audience. And what would be one piece of advice that you'd like to leave them with? If you can narrow it down.
If I can narrow it down. We have lived in a year where we have become accustomed to an invisible virus. Yeah. And when it comes to our emotions are even more contagious than COVID. Yeah. And so therefore we need to be, to think about that, to really think about what mood am I sowing today to the people around me? And especially as a leader, because leaders, people catch people's emotions, and they catch the leader's emotions in an even more powerful way. Mm-hmm. And so we are more powerful than we think we are. And leaders, even in situations where they think, oh, what can I do? And I always say, your emotions will be caught. And if you show up with the right tone and with the right emotional setup, people naturally will catch that emotion. So my message would be just embrace that power and be very deliberate in the tone that you set wherever you are.
That's awesome. And where can people find you if they would like to know more?
So my website is my name, irvinenugent.com. There is actually, for those, any listeners who, I think Matt alluded to it, they're kind of like, maybe what's all this emotional intelligence? I actually have a free on-demand course just on the basics of what is emotional intelligence. And you can find that out at irvinenugent.com/podcast. And you'll get that. And then I also have a YouTube channel just from my name. And every week I have an educational video on an aspect of emotional intelligence. So feel free to drop over there and subscribe. And it's a great way as well of expanding your knowledge in emotional intelligence.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time. I'll put all of that in the show notes so that people can find it easy. And please share this message with somebody who needs to hear about emotional intelligence, because I think we all could grow in that area. And please subscribe, please rate and review us. And until next time, own your life, because your life is your responsibility. Thank you all for listening. If this added value to you, please click subscribe and rate and review us. You can also find us at Own Your Life Co. on Instagram and Facebook, and ownyourlifeco.com. And as always, own your life, because your life is your responsibility.